What would you do if your homeowners association fined you a jaw-dropping $250,000 for violations on your own property? This is Tracelight Stories. Subscribe to the channel now. Now, imagine you get the last laugh by proving in court that you own the very ground $1 million homes are built on. An overzealous HOA thought they could financially crush one man, but they never imagined he was secretly their landlord. They picked a fight, and the devastating truth came out in the one place they couldn't control: a courtroom. Some battles are fought over inches of land. Others are fought over principles. And sometimes, a fight that starts with a complaint over lawn clippings ends in the total collapse of a neighborhood power structure. It's one of those stories that sounds too good to be true, a modern fable that has become the stuff of internet legend. The names and places often change as it's retold on forums and social media, but the heart of the story is always the same. It's about what happens when bullies push a quiet man too far, only to find out the person they thought was a mouse was actually a lion, holding the deed to their entire kingdom. This is one of those legends. Our story, as the legend goes, begins with a man the internet often calls David Harlan. David wasn't a troublemaker. He was the opposite. A retired civil engineer in his late 60s, he was a man who lived by logic and believed in clear boundaries. After a lifetime of meticulous work, all David wanted was a quiet retirement and a piece of Texas land for his personal workshop. He found the perfect spot, a lovely 3-acre plot of unincorporated land. It was serene and, most importantly, all his. The property had one key feature. It sat right next to a pristine, upscale gated community we'll call Willow Creek Estates. Willow Creek was the poster child for suburban order. Lawns were cut to a precise 2.5 inches, and every home was painted a pre-approved shade of beige. It was a community that ran on rules, a place where conformity was mistaken for harmony. Being a careful man, David did his homework. He went to the county records office, pulled the maps and surveys, and triple-checked everything. The conclusion was crystal clear. His 3 acres were entirely separate from Willow Creek Estates. His land was not, and could never be, under the jurisdiction of their HOA. Satisfied, he bought the land and started planning his workshop. But while David operated on quiet logic, Willow Creek was governed by something else entirely. Its HOA president, a woman who the stories call Brenda. To Brenda, the neighborhood wasn't a community. It was her personal kingdom. She was infamous for her meticulous enforcement of the rules, once trying to fine a family because their visiting grandchild's birthday balloons were excessively festive. She patrolled the streets in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, searching for any infraction. Soon, her gaze turned to David Harlan's project, just beyond her gates. To Brenda, David wasn't a new neighbor. He was a new problem, a nail that needed to be hammered down. The first sign of trouble arrived on a quiet Tuesday. David had just started work on his workshop when he found a crisp, white envelope in his mailbox. It wasn't a welcome letter. It was a formal warning from the Willow Creek HOA, citing a violation for unapproved construction and demanding all work stop immediately. David figured it was a simple mistake. He composed a polite, professional letter in response, explaining that his property wasn't part of their subdivision. To make it easy, he included a copy of his land survey with the property lines clearly marked. He mailed it off, confident that facts would solve the problem. He was wrong. Facts didn't matter to Brenda. Submission did. A week later, a second envelope arrived. Inside was his polite letter and survey, now attached to a new letter from the HOA. His appeal had been denied. And then the punch, a $1,000 fine for failing to comply. This was no longer a misunderstanding. David realized he wasn't dealing with a reasonable organization. He was dealing with a bully. Brenda hadn't just ignored his proof. She'd thrown it back in his face. The first shot had been fired, not as a mistake, but as a deliberate act of aggression. David Harlan was a patient man, but he wasn't a pushover. He read the second letter and understood that polite emails were pointless. The HOA didn't want a dialogue. They wanted dominance. So David made a choice. He was going to keep building his workshop. It was his right, on his land, and he refused to be bullied. The moment his hammer started ringing again, the HOA's harassment campaign went into overdrive. The letters became a weekly flood. The fines piled up. $2,500 for improper storage of construction materials, $5,000 for landscaping not conforming to community standards because he stacked sod in a neat pile. They fined him for the color of his tarps, for excessive dust, and for the auditory nuisance of his generator. Brenda and her board were inventing violations, applying their rules to a property they had no claim over. Within months, the bogus fine snowballed into an astronomical sum of just over $250,000. The point wasn't to collect the money. It was to threaten him with a legal battle so expensive he'd be forced to give up. The harassment got personal. Brenda started filming David with her smartphone from the HOA property line. They called the county with anonymous, baseless complaints about code violations and environmental disturbances. Each time, an inspector would come out, find nothing wrong, and leave, wasting everyone's time. David was frustrated and tired of the constant siege. He could have hired a lawyer for a simple cease and desist, but his engineer's mind saw a deeper puzzle. Why were they so confident? Why were they willing to spend member dues to pursue a baseless vendetta? He decided he wasn't just going to defend himself. He was going to take a closer look at the very foundation of Willow Creek Estates. This is where David's meticulous nature became his superpower. He went back to the county records office, but this time, he wasn't just looking at his own deed. He pulled the entire history of the Willow Creek subdivision, the master plan from the 70s, title transfers, and every survey map filed over the last 50 years. After weeks in the dusty archives, poring over brittle paper maps, he found it. It was an anomaly, a tiny clerical error made decades ago. When the original developer subdivided the land, a key central parcel was somehow misrecorded. This long, oddly shaped piece of land included the main road, the park, the community clubhouse, and even the land under the front gate. The developer's company had dissolved, and the ownership of this crucial parcel was never properly transferred to the HOA. David's heart pounded as he traced the history of this phantom parcel. Where did it go? The trail was murky, but it ended with the county seizing the land for unpaid taxes and lumping it into a portfolio of forgotten scraps to be sold at public auction. An audacious idea began to form. The HOA started a war over an imaginary line. He had just discovered a way to own the very ground beneath their feet. David quickly formed a boringly named LLC, something like Texas Land Management Services, with no public link to him. Through this anonymous company, he found a forgotten parcel on the county's auction list. No one else was interested. For the price of a used car, David's LLC became the legal owner of the main road, the entrance, and the common areas of Willow Creek Estates. The HOA had been trespassing on his land for 30 years and had no idea. But he didn't stop there. He got a copy of the HOA bylaws and found a simple rule. All board members must be property owners in Willow Creek. Out of curiosity, he ran a property check on the board. The icing on the cake, Brenda, the queen bee signing all the fines, didn't own her home. The property was in her elderly parents' names. Legally, she was just a resident. Her presidency, her board position, and every fine she had ever issued were completely illegitimate. David now held all the cards. The HOA was suing him for $250,000 while he secretly owned their infrastructure and held proof that their leader was a fraud. He said nothing. He just filed the new deeds away and waited. David was holding a royal flush, and the HOA had no idea they were about to go all in. Before we get to the epic courtroom showdown, let me ask you, what's the most absurd HOA rule you've ever heard of? Let us know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because you don't want to miss how it ends. Blinded by arrogance, the HOA made its fatal error. They officially sued David Harlan. They wanted a judge to validate their outrageous fines and place a lien on David's property, allowing them to foreclose and seize his land. They dragged him to the one place where opinions mean nothing, and evidence is king. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side sat the HOA's slick, expensive lawyer, with the smug-looking board members behind him. Brenda was in the front row, dressed in a power suit. shooting a triumphant smirk at David. On the other side sat David and his quiet, unassuming lawyer. David himself was calm, looking more like a man waiting for a bus than a defendant in a high-stakes lawsuit. The HOA's lawyer presented his case with dramatic flair, painting David as a nuisance who disregarded community standards. He presented a mountain of evidence, photos, letters, and a ledger detailing the $250,000 in fines. When he finished, the board members nodded, self-satisfied. The judge looked over at David's lawyer. "Your response?" David's lawyer rose slowly. He walked to the center of the room and ignored their entire case. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm and clear, "we won't be wasting the court's time disputing these alleged violations." Confusion rippled through the HOA's side of the room. Brenda leaned forward, her smirk widening. She thought they were surrendering. Her smirk vanished. "We won't dispute them because they're irrelevant," the lawyer continued. "We move for a summary dismissal on the grounds that the plaintiff, the Willow Creek Estates HOA, lacks legal standing to impose any rules on my client's property." "Objection!" the HOA's lawyer shouted. "That's absurd." The judge turned to David's lawyer. "On what grounds, counsel?" This was the moment. David's lawyer opened his briefcase. "On the grounds of ownership, Your Honor." He pulled out a certified deed. "The plaintiff has based its entire case on the claim that they control Willow Creek Estates. The problem is, they don't actually own Willow Creek Estates." He placed the deed on the judge's bench. "This document shows that the primary road, the entrance gate, the community park, and all other common areas are the legal property of our client, Texas Land Management Services, LLC." He then produced the LLC's incorporation documents, with David Harlan as the sole owner. Stunned silence. The judge scanned the documents, her eyes wide. The HOA's lawyer stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Brenda's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, the pale mask of pure horror. "Your Honor," David's lawyer said, "the plaintiff has been trespassing on my client's land for 30 years. Their gate is on his property. Their residents drive on his road. They have no authority to enforce any rules." Before the HOA lawyer could stammer a response, David's lawyer delivered the final blow. "Furthermore, Your Honor, even if they had standing, their actions would be invalid." He produced another document. The HOA's own bylaws state that all board members must be titled property owners. The president of the board, Ms. Brenda Miller, who signed this lawsuit, is not a property owner. She is a tenant. Her presidency is illegitimate, and every action she has taken is null and void. The judge put down the papers and glared at the HOA's lawyer, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. She then turned her gaze to Brenda, whose face was crimson with humiliation. "Is this true?" she asked the HOA's lawyer. "Do you have title to this land?" He stammered, "Your Honor, we were unaware of this clerical discrepancy." The judge slammed her gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Then you have no case. Lawsuit dismissed with prejudice. I am ordering the plaintiff to pay all of Mr. Harlan's legal fees, and I suggest you have very serious talk with your clients about filing frivolous lawsuits. Get out of my courtroom." The gavel's fall wasn't an ending, it was a detonation. The moment the board scrambled out of the courtroom, the carefully constructed world of Willow Creek imploded. News of the disaster spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The community's private social media page, once Brenda's propaganda machine, erupted in chaos. Asterisk, is it true? Does he really own the road? Can he lock the gate? Asterisk, the entire legal foundation of their community had vanished overnight. The neighborhood fractured. Residents who had long suffered under Brenda's rule were secretly thrilled. A few even drove to David's property to shake his hand and congratulate him. They were the ones who'd been fined for having the wrong wind chimes or planting unapproved flowers. To them, David was a liberator. But many others were terrified. They had bought into Willow Creek for its security and exclusivity. Now, an outsider their own leaders had antagonized held all the power. They pictured a future with toll booths on their own streets. Their fear quickly turned to rage, not at David, but at Brenda and the board. How could they have been so arrogant and incompetent? The fallout was swift. Brenda became a pariah. She was accosted in the community park, David's Park, by angry neighbors demanding answers. Her illegitimate presidency became a symbol of the HOA's complete failure. A week later, David called a community meeting in the gazebo in his park. Nearly every resident of Willow Creek showed up, their faces a mix of anxiety and reluctant respect. Brenda was nowhere to be seen. David stood before them, not as a conqueror, but as the reasonable man he'd always been. He didn't gloat or talk of revenge. "I didn't ask for this fight," he began. "I just wanted to build my workshop. Your board forced this situation, but I'm not them. I have no interest in being a tyrant." A collective sigh of relief went through the crowd. "I will not be blocking the gate," he continued. "I will not be charging you tolls. That's not who I am. But things will change. The Willow Creek Estates HOA, as it exists today, is dissolved. Its authority was based on a lie." He then made his proposal. He would grant a permanent easement for the use of the roads and common areas. In exchange, they would form a new, fair road maintenance agreement. No more architectural committee. No more rules about mailbox colors or grass height. Just a small annual fee to cover upkeep. He was setting them free. The residents eagerly accepted. The corrupt board was dismantled. Brenda, stripped of her power and publicly humiliated, had her parents sell the house, and she moved away within a month. The neighborhood got its freedom back, all because one man, when pushed, had the wisdom to not just push back, but to dig down and check the receipts. This internet legend, whether it's a true story or a collection of tales about HOA overreach, serves as a powerful cautionary tale. It's a story about the intoxicating nature of petty power and the spectacular downfall that comes from pure hubris. It's a reminder that in any fight, it pays to do your homework. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a lawsuit or a threat. It's a dusty, forgotten deed filed away in a county office. Do well to like the video. Subscribe to the channel as it helps us grow. Share the story. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.